Uhuru. I really want to express appreciation to the organizers of this year's African Liberation Day. I traveled here from Huntsville, Alabama, about 12-hour drive. We bring greetings from Africans who've been going through it in Alabama with this recent tornadoes. You know, we're going to talk about it a little bit, but Africans are always disproportionately affected by these natural disasters. And it's no exception in Alabama. I mean, a lot of Africans now who have nothing, their homes have been decimated. You know, people lost a lot of work. A lot of times we're not salaried people, so a lot of folks lost hours on the job, and there's really not much in place to really help us. But one thing that I really appreciate about this last week or last couple weeks is that the African community, at least where I live, has really begun to pull together and recognize that we're not going to get through the storm, we're not going to get through anything unless we come together as a people. So I saw that as something to be encouraged by. And so we just really want to, you know, bring greetings to you from Africans from that part of the U.S. AOD 2011. Okay, we ready? Okay. So today I'm going to talk very briefly about an organization of the Uhuru movement, one of the more recently built organizations in the Uhuru movement, which is called the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project. You should be able to push that button down there, and it'll start the slideshow. The one that kind of looks like a cup. Right down there. With 71%, right next to 71%. Right here. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Uhuru. So, are you going to be my slide person? Okay, thank you, brother. Appreciate that. Okay, could you go to the next one, please? Okay. So, AAPDEP is an organization of the Uhuru movement that was established in September of 2007 with the mission of organizing development projects around the world, making use of the vast technical expertise that African people have all around the world. AAPDEP does rainwater harvesting, healthcare projects, fishing, farming, renewable energy, ecological sanitation, and other kinds of work. Ooh, it got kind of mixed. This might be my old version. So we're going to have to bear with me, comrades. But AAPDEP is not about charity. Can you go forward, please? Next one. Thank you. AAPDEP is about African people coming together to build self-sufficient organizations that take on projects that help to create what we call dual power in the African community. So these are projects that are not done to make someone feel good about the fact that, you know, now there's a well being built or now there's a healthcare program that's happening, but something that's a part of the overall strategy of the Uhuru movement to get at what Comrade Sama talked about, which is the core of the reason why everywhere you see African people, you see poverty, despite the immense wealth that is our birthright as African people. If you could just turn off the PowerPoint, because I think this is the old one. I'm just going to go, you know, in discussion. But thank you, brother. But AAPDEP has been an organization that's really been struggling to become what it is that we need to be. I think what we talked about earlier with the brother talking about Haiti is something that's really important, because African people, no matter where we are, we suffer like we said, disproportionately when there are so-called natural disasters or other kinds of things that happen. African people around the world, for the most part, experience the lowest kind of standard of living. Between 70 and 90% of African people on the continent of Africa have no access to electricity. More than half of African people do not have access to clean water. Most African people, I think between 70 and 80%, do not have access to decent, dignified sanitation. And this isn't just, on the continent of Africa, but this is wherever we find ourselves as African people. Many people don't know, but even in Mississippi, in the Delta, there are places where African people don't have access to electricity, don't have running water, don't have any kind of decent sanitation or access to health care. There are places in Milwaukee where African women die in childbirth at rates comparable to Botswana. There are all kinds of contradictions that African people are faced with, and in isolation we can tend to feel like this is something that is just happening to us in one place, and we're not able to connect the dots and recognize that all of the stuff that we're dealing with as African people anywhere is what we're dealing with as African people everywhere. And AAPDEP has the responsibility of pulling African people, wherever we are, into a process where we can use the skills, use the energy, use the talent that we have as African people to develop projects, to develop programs that not only help in the short term to be able to address our conditions and make improvements in our lives in the short term, but in the long term to be able to win people to the understanding that, if it were not for the fact that we didn't have control of access of our resources, we would have all the clean water we need. To be able to win people to the understanding that, why white people all the world, around the world are wealthy? Because the resources that's supposed to give you water is giving them water. You know why you don't have electricity in Uganda? 90% of Africans in Uganda don't have electricity. It's not because there's no electricity being generated in Uganda, because there is, but it's being exported. Where? To Europe. So it's not a question of having projects. It's not just a question of, having skills in one place or another, but it's a political question. And AAPDEP is an organization that we have a mission that's two-pronged: to deal with the immediate, but to win our people to the understanding that ultimately we've got to make a revolution. If we want to have the kind of life that as African people that we deserve, that's what it's going to take. Because the only way, we hear a lot about sustainable development. That's like a buzzword. Sustainable development, sustainable development. Okay, what is it going to take for us to have sustainable development? It's going to take us having self-determination. How do we get self-determination? We got to get back our resources. How do we get back our resources? We got to take them back. That's how we do it. That's the chain of events. That's the logic we have to follow. And how do we know that's true? How do we know that I just didn't pull that out of a bag I have somewhere that says, here's what you say when you talk about sustainable development? Because we can look at history. We can look at history. Cuba, before the revolution, had a very high rate of illiteracy, had a very low rate of access to health care for the average person, had very little of anything that made life decent for the average Cuban person. But what happened? Cuba made a revolution. Within a span of years, I mean, not even a lifetime, because some of us were able to see this in a lifetime. So it wasn't like they had to wait hundreds of years for the lights to turn on in Cuba. Now what do you have in Cuba? After the revolution, after the Cuban people took their lives in their own hands, now you have a place that ranks 32nd in the world in terms of standard of living. Now you have a place, despite the fact that the UN doesn't want to recognize that. Cuba, I don't know if y'all know this, but the UN does this Human Development Index ranking that takes different countries in the world and they rank. You have a high standard of living here, you have a very high standard of living, medium, low standard of living. And every year, at least since the 90s, Cuba has been on that. It may have been before that, but at least since then has been on this ranking around the 50s, okay? Now, this year would have been a year where Cuba went from the 50s to 31 or 32, which would have placed it in a high level, very high standard of living. This year, guess what happened? They didn't put Cuba on the list. Now, part of the reason, and the Cuban government is very clear about why it is that this has happened, part of it is, you know what the average life expectancy here is in the U.S.? it's about 79.6 years. The average life expectancy in Cuba is 79 years. Now, when we're talking about Africans in the United States, we're not talking about 79 years. You know, we're talking about dropping dead right before Social Security kicks in. So we're definitely not talking about 79.6 years for Africans. But we're talking about 79 years in Cuba. When you talk about the average amount of education that people get in the U.S., something like 10 years as compared to 17 years in Cuba. So what you have is proof, evidence. And not only in Cuba, we can make other examples, but that's an easy one to make. We have evidence that when you take control over what belongs to you, and Cuba has very little resources to speak of, very little resources to speak of, with all of the hydropower in Africa, with all of the oil in Africa, with all of the diamonds in Africa, with all of the rutile in Africa, with all of the bauxite in Africa, with all of the intellectual wealth in Africa, with all of that, what's missing? What's missing? That's it. That's the question. So if you want to talk about sustainable development, if you want to talk about how Africans are going to have access to all the things that we have around the world, you got to be talking about taking back your resources, or you're not talking about nothing at all. You're not talking about nothing at all. So I had some pretty pictures I wanted to show y'all. I'm really sorry that we're not going to be able to do that, because AAPDEP has done some great work over the last few years. We've done healthcare projects in Sierra Leone, training community people how to prevent, identify, and treat waterborne diseases. We've done clean water projects, you know, rainwater harvesting projects that have helped to provide clean water to hundreds of people in a small subsistence farming community. We have an international project right now in Sierra Leone that addresses the question of infant and maternal health. Something like 1 in 8 African women dies in childbirth in Sierra Leone. 1 in 10 babies dies before the age of 1. We have a really dynamic project in Africa, which is led by a nurse midwife called Mary Karoma, who's based in Sierra Leone, who's leading the effort to train traditional birth attendants, to build a clinic, to provide nutrition to pregnant women that we know in short order is going to start turning those numbers around for African women in Sierra Leone. We've got dynamic work that's happening right here in the United States, right here in D.C., Ivy City. We had a community garden. We're building this year for the Marcus Garvey Saturday School for children, teaching African children development skills and history and, you know, political education. In D.C., we've got the AAPDEP 5th Ward Community Garden and Food Cooperative, where you got young folks, elders coming together with a beautiful garden. We do the festival. We just kicked off last year for the first year. Hundreds of people in the community come out, participate in the garden work, have a good time, listen to music, pull together, share, you know, expertise. We've got work that we're building now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to build AAPDEP there. We've got work now, really exciting work, to build 2 branches of AAPDEP in Colombia, South America, and African communities in Buenaventura and Medellin, to address clean water and healthcare issues there. And we know that there's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot more we should do. AAPDEP is not where we need to be. We're not who we need to be yet. What we're missing is y'all. We're missing y'all, because we're not there yet. We're not there yet, but when we get y'all, when we get more of us in there, we're going to be where we need to be. So I encourage you, I invite you to come to our table, to get some brochures, to join AAPDEP membership. We just revamped the whole membership. We're not making no barriers to membership. We're busting it wide open. $25 a year, bam, membership. You want to be really bad, $60, you get a t-shirt, bam. You really want to be super, super bad, 2 years, $120 t-shirt, mug, to a free conference, I mean, e-newsletter, you can't beat it. Join AAPDEP today. We got a camp, a summer camp, and I'm going to get out of your way. We got a summer camp for the children this summer. It's going to be in Oscar Sheriff State Park outside of Sarasota, Florida. It's going to be about $40 for young people. Adults who want to come, it's going to be about $50, $55, something like that. We encourage you to come. We're going to be teaching survival skills, development skills. We're going to have a great time. It's going to be July 15th through the 17th as a part of the Uhuru Movement Summer Project. Got flyers on the table. Join this organization. Join this movement. If it's not AAPDEP, just join the movement. I really express appreciation to you for letting me blabber on without my presentation, but build AAPDEP, comrades, and y'all come on in and join us. Uhuru.